Welcome everyone. So this is the Multifamily Mastery Meetup, if you don't already know. I'm your host, my name's Cole, and co-hosting with me is Dave. We have Rob Jacobs here today, which is going to be super exciting. But before we get to that, we do have a sponsor tonight, and unfortunately he is not here. Dave Papula, if you guys know him, he's with the Real Estate Investor MBA. They have a lot of cool coaching stuff going on, and they're doing really good things with what they're doing. So they normally have a table set up, which we don't have, but like I said, I'm happy to share their info. So anybody that's interested in learning more about what they're doing, how they're doing it, or being a part of that, please let me know, and we'll chat more afterwards. Without our intro, we're going to jump right in. So we have Rob Jacobs today. Rob is a lawyer. He and I worked together on my last syndication I just did. We went through the transaction. We did a lot of chatting about the whole SEC process, and is fantastic. So he specializes in business, real estate, all sorts of tax avenues, and I'm just super excited to have him. So tell us more about you and kind of just jump into your story.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer in Easton. Just me, I'm a solo practice. Grew up in Easton, went to college and law school out in California, moved back here 20 years ago. I've been doing business and real estate, transactional stuff for the last 20 years. I have a tax degree. After I got my law degree, I got an LLM in tax down at Villanova, which helps. There's a lot of tax issues associated with real estate and estate planning, and so I don't consider myself a tax expert, but it helps inform a lot of decision making, and there's not a lot of lawyers that know anything about tax, so it helps. Yeah, I mean, that's, I probably, I know I overheard some conversations and I talked to, heard about what you're talking about. I mean, I tend to do just transactional work. I tend to be pretty, I'm relatively fortunate. I've been around long enough and I'm busy enough. I tend to focus just on what I know and what I think I'm good at, which is transactional stuff related to buying and selling businesses, buying and selling multifamily properties. When things go south, I tend to farm out all the litigation. So if you have some problem where your deal has gone south, I can probably give you like what I think will likely happen, but I wouldn't be the one helping you file, whatever you need to file in court.
Nice. All right, a baseline question for you. So when do you need a lawyer versus just using a title company, just using your agent or broker? Yeah. At what point do you come in that people should kind of come to you?
That's a tough question to answer. I mean, it depends on your attitude, I guess, and your philosophy on how much due diligence you want to do, how much you want to spend as part of your sort of background due diligence. I mean, I tell people this. I have sort of a spectrum of clients. Some call me, once in a blue moon when they need something, and some call me, literally every day for 10 years. And I think the ones that call me, obsessively, I think they're the most successful, not so much because of me and my advice, but just because that's the way they operate. They do due diligence everything. I have one guy that he has me review his snowplow agreement, literally. He owns a lot of multifamily projects and he hires a snowplow guy and he has me review it. So that gives you an idea of, again, sort of a spectrum and a philosophy of how you operate your business. So it's hard to answer when you should use a lawyer. It's just, I think as early and as often as possible. That's not intended to be self-serving. I just think.
So the reason I ask that is I feel like a lot of times, like with the commercial stuff, I feel like that goes over a lot of people's heads. And they're like, let's go get help. And I feel like on a basic transaction, someone's might be coming to you, how do I do X, Y, and Z, when their title company should just be taking care of that. And I feel like that's just what gets muddy. And
I have some thoughts about that. In the old days, even before I was a lawyer here in PA, the title companies used to be just run by lawyers, and at some point they foolishly let that go, and so non-lawyers can now provide title services. So at least among the people I know, half the title companies are owned and sort of overseen by lawyers, and half are non-lawyers. Just personally, I feel like if it's a regular single-family owner-occupied home that uses the PAR agreement, the PA Realtor agreement, then fine. use a non-lawyer title company, everything is probably going to be fine. But if it's a commercial deal or if it's something that's hairy, even though it's technically a title matter, I do closings and title. I kind of feel like some of those title companies are doing things they're not qualified to do. Like if there's an easement that you need to draft and record, like they're just not qualified to do that. I don't know if any of you are title agents, but
anyone's here a title agent?
Yeah. So
Awesome.
Again, I'm not here to make self-serving statements. I just like in terms of just what I see, and I see things that are poorly done because you just didn't engage the right people.
Yeah, makes sense. So all of us here are real estate investors, right? We're either going solo, we're doing some kind of joint venture, or we're in some kind of syndication. As far as the joint venture and the syndication, what would you say is like the major difference between them, at least as far as the legality goes?
I guess define what you mean by joint venture.
Partners going together, buying a property, and that's it, versus securities.
Okay.
You want to jump with a basic question before that one?
Which one's that?
All right, so
Hit it.
who here has not formed a corporate entity before? Anybody else? So this is one like the 101 questions. I said we're going to throw one or two of them out there at the beginning, right? So I'm a new investor. I've read that I need some sort of a corporate entity because otherwise all of the liability goes on me, right? So what's that look like in like 5 sentences or less?
Yeah,
how much money, how much time, and what do you need from me?
If you're buying an investment property, generally you should do it through an LLC. It's not absolutely required, but makes sense for a variety of reasons. Especially if you're going to be going in with a partner, then it really makes sense. To form an LLC, if you pay an expedited filing fee, it can be done same day, basically.
Okay.
It's quick, it's easy. You need an operating agreement, which everybody has probably seen, which you can spend a lot of time on, going over a million different variations and buy-sell provisions. Most people, when they're starting out, they have a good relationship with their partner, and they say, oh yeah, it's going to be 50-50. We're friends. If there's any problem, we'll deal with it then. And most partnerships don't work out. So, the operating agreement can't solve that many of the times. That's the problem. Is you can spend a lot of time and money thinking about and drafting an operating agreement with you and your partner, and what happens when if one of us becomes disabled, dies, gets divorced, moves away. That's the sort of the standard buy-sell provisions that are in an operating agreement. And at least what I see most often, and what many of you have probably seen, is what happens when you just stop getting along with your partner. It's not that they became disabled, they didn't get divorced. That's what happens 90% of the time. And it's difficult to draft a document that addresses that. It's difficult to come up with fair provisions about what happens when we both just stop getting along. We think the company should go in a different direction.
Absolutely. Setting clear expectations, clear purpose, clear vision.
Yeah, kind of the only thing that maybe makes sense is you sort of have there's all kinds of different terms for it, but basically like look, if we're not getting along, you either need to buy me out or we're going to sell the asset and then we'll go our different ways. Sort of I don't know what you want to call it, but that's kind of the only way to deal with partners who are not getting along.
Yeah.
And then the syndication model, which I know, comes up a lot, and there's a lot of garbage online about how to structure it.
There's a lot.
There's a lot of gurus that will pay. You can pay them $5,000 for a weekend boot camp.
Yeah, it just depends on what you're trying to accomplish and like what your structure is going to be. The best structure that I see is you have one guy who's the main guy. You can call him the sponsor, the promoter, the general partner, whatever you want. There's one guy, and then the rest, they're technically equity owners because they invest $50,000 into the project and therefore they acquire a 10% ownership interest in the entity, but they are effectively lenders. They don't participate in the management, they don't participate in a whole variety of, again, sort of management issues. They're not guarantors under any loan docs. They get paid if the project does well. They get paid, typically the actual structure of that is the investors get paid back first. Once the investors have gotten paid in full, then the promoter gets his bonus, which is, there's different words for that. It's called carried interest. It's called a promote. That's where you as the promoter, you did a great job, and all of a sudden you get a big chunk of the cash flow of the business sort of up front, and then the investors get the balance, sort of pro rata based on their investment.
So I remember when we were working on the Newport deal, it was, do we go JV? Do we have just a couple people pull together and close it that way? Or do we go full syndication route? And I think some of the things that we chatted about were just, how much money is being raised? Is it worth the cost to go that full syndication route? Because there's so many different pieces to that. But if it is worth it, then great. And I guess, just like you mentioned, it's not really a cut and dry, do this, don't do this. However, is there a point when the JV becomes too big and you have too many partners that are active?
Yes, I think so. I mean, again, just like we talked about, that partnerships regularly and 90% of the time fail. So when you say JV, I mean, I would advise somebody, look, like if you're like three guys and you're all going to have a third vote, and you're all going to participate in some meaningful way in the management of the company, like you're setting yourself up for not failure, but like you're just not going to get along 3 years from now. So, this syndication, like, when you need to go out and, quote, syndicate, which means, raise money from other people. It depends a little bit on your partners. My most successful guy, he's always the GP or the promoter, and he's got, 5 to 10 investor partners, and it's the same 5 to 10 on every deal. Sometimes one doesn't want to participate, but so, I mean, that would be my suggestion. I mean, sometimes people don't have those relationships where you have like an investor group you can call upon. I mean, hopefully as you get more successful, if you do one deal and it works out, clearly the original guys are going to want to get in, and then there'll be a couple more, and hopefully after 5 years you have that pool of people you can draw on. But to me, that works best, is if you have 5 to 10 guys and females, male and female, who you can say, look, this is our next project. We need to raise, obviously it depends on the size of the project, but we need to raise $400,000 of equity, and then we're going to finance the rest. So everybody's going to put up $50,000 or $100,000. Usually there's a couple guys that have, huge net worth, and they're like, fine, I'll give you 100 or 200, and then the guys that are a little bit weaker can put in 25 to 50. That's what I've seen work the best.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got, in our audience over there, we got Debbie, right? So she is a medical provider. She works in a hospital surrounded by a whole bunch of people that make a bunch of money, right? Doctors and nurses and the like. And so she decides she wants to start syndicating. Okay, so at this point here, like, what would the first steps be, and what are some of the gotchas or pitfalls you got to watch out for in those opening phases?
Just be cautious about the securities laws. Again, there's sort of a spectrum of how formal you want to go about the syndication. I mean, what I tend to see and recommend most is, don't raise $25,000 from 20 different people who are, 19 of which are non-accredited investors, meaning, the accredited investor is somebody that has more than, it's still $1 million net worth, or they make at least $200,000 of income per year. It's a SEC term. So
that's a big thing too. I don't know if anybody, if I just want to repeat that, if you're accredited, it means you have over a certain amount of net worth, or you make over a certain amount of money per year, or if you're married, something like that. And that depends on what kind of investment you can make. Some stuff you can't invest in if you're not accredited, if you don't hit those barriers. So
the SEC just says if you're at that point, then we don't really care about you. You know what you're doing at this point. So if you want to go ahead and invest in some shady places and lose all of your money, you're probably still going to be okay with what you got left. So
we'll touch back on that.
Prevent the common people from losing their stake.
Yeah, it's sort of a public policy like concept or rule, which is, look, those people have plenty of money. We don't need to protect them. And so if you're raising money from your coworkers and they're accredited, there are one set of rules on how you raise money for a syndication or a project. If you're raising from non-accredited investors, again, they need the protection, at least according to the SEC, so there is a different set of rules. And most of the larger successful promoters, people that put the project together, they only raise money from accredited investors. If you're raising, from non-accredited just because that's you have no other choice, you just have to be really cautious about it. You got to follow the rules.
I know one of the big things too with the accredited versus not is if you're only raising from an accredited investor, you're doing a 506C is what it's called, you can advertise anywhere. So if you're doing a accredited investor only thing, I can go on Facebook and advertise it, I can go on wherever, and there's rules to that, I'm sure. But the idea is you can advertise it, where if you're raising from people that aren't accredited, you cannot just go advertise it. You have to have a relationship and go from there. Just to zone in on some of those rules.
Yeah, right. That's one of the differences between the rules. But again, most of the smart guys that do this on a regular basis, even if they are raising only from accredited investors, they don't engage in advertising. It's almost by definition, it's called a private offering, which means, yes, we understand we could, in theory, advertise, but we're not going to, because the SEC doesn't like that. So we're going to draw upon our usual group of people who we know are accredited. We have prior relationships with them. Those are the only people we need, and we're going to send them our flip book or whatever you want to call it. We're not putting it on Facebook.
Interesting, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. What does timeline usually look like? So say Debbie wants to go out and start this, timeline start to finish, and just like general costs to put that whole package together.
It depends a little on how you document it.
Okay.
I mean, if it was the way I like to do it, which is you are using your usual pool of investors and they're going to come in as members of an LLC and it's going to be $1 million of equity or $500,000 of equity raised, and then again the financing is the rest, and it's going to be 7 investors as opposed, and we're not going to do any public advertising. I mean, that's mostly what I do. That's what I like clients to do. That's not terribly expensive or time consuming. You need to form an LLC. You need to give those potential investors some disclosure documents, not necessarily a full-blown private offering materials that, some of you may have seen on the internet or downloaded. I call it disclosure light, which says, look, like you're investing in my project. I'm just Debbie from Allentown. I have limited experience in real estate. It's not going to be liquid. You might lose your money. I mean, just like common sense disclosure, like the reality of if you want to be liquid and have some type of secure investment, like don't invest with me. Invest in a bank CD or invest in, like a publicly traded mutual fund. Like by definition, you're investing in me. I'm not the most experienced real estate investor in the world, and I'm buying a project in downtown Allentown, and it's going to require renovation, and it's going to be totally illiquid. And if we're lucky, it'll do well, and we'll sell it in 5 years. And at that point, hopefully you'd get your money back plus a decent return. So that's that's the spectrum of what you want them to invest in, again, versus like the other end of the spectrum is just go, make 4% at a bank CD. That's why, because yes, they can potentially make 20% IRR per year, but it's considerably more risky, and you need to disclose that to them. So again, like the cost and the timeline for doing it that way is not that much. I mean, you're doing a full-blown like Reg D offering where you're filing with the SEC and you're foolishly raising money from non-accredited investors. It's going to be more expensive and it's going to take more time.
Gotcha. So let me ask you this. One of the most common questions I get is I have a self-directed IRA and I want to invest in something. Doesn't necessarily have to be a syndication, but from the tax standpoint or just general standpoint, how does that flow?
You can. I mean, I hate like being the downer and like the bad news, bearer of bad news. There are those self-directed IRA programs. There are custodians that specialize in self-directed IRA investments, and they'll guide you through the process and allegedly guide you through all the rules you have to follow. I don't think they're doing it properly. I mean, again, I think I have more expertise in that than they do. The IRA rules are really particular and restrictive, and I think if the IRS wasn't so underfunded and understaffed, they would crack down on that. Again, sometimes people don't have another source of income. I mean, if you had like a regular day job during your 20s and you built up a decent IRA or a 401k and you want to use that and that's your only source of funds, maybe that's what you do. And again, you use one of these big national companies that, they cover the basics of what's required, but I don't think they do it right either. And the risk for me is, an IRA is sort of like a magic account that no other personal financial planning and investment account has those tax advantages. And the worst case scenario with using a self-directed IRA in the wrong way is the IRS finally catches up with these things and they blow it up. They say you engaged in what's called a prohibited transaction, so you blew up your IRA. It's no longer an IRA. It's going to be a deemed distribution of the entire IRA to you, which is subject to income tax. And oh, by the way, you're less than 59 and a half, so you're subject to an early withdrawal penalty. So for that reason, I usually tell people, again, if you don't have any other choice, maybe you take the risk, but I always tell people, if you're lucky enough to have an IRA, don't touch it.
Interesting. So let me ask you this. You've seen people in a lot of rough states, I'm sure, from the things that have gone on with them that then come to you. What do you think causes them to lose their way? Or just what have you seen?
That's a good question. I think just people not being diligent. There's guys that, are outright crooks, and it's hard to manage that. It's hard to draft documents to address if somebody's just going to outright steal from you. That doesn't come up that often. I think what comes up more often is people just aren't diligent. And sort of going back to the first thing I talked about. I had somebody call me, 2 weeks ago because they were engaged to do some heavy renovation work at a gas station, and they made all kinds of changes orally to the agreement they had with the owner, and then the owner got, unilaterally changed some things. Again, it was all done via text and orally, and then they got way behind in terms of their payment structure. You just have to, again, I get one call a week that, I hired this contractor and he disappeared and he owes me $7,000. Don't pay a contractor in advance. Only pay him for work performed. That's so easy to manage. So that's what I see more often. Again, it's just do the due diligence. If you're buying something, go through the rent roll. Because that's all you're buying is the rent roll.
Yeah.
And I know that sometimes the owners don't want you to go talk to the tenants, but if it looks like a crook and you don't think it's right, and there's I get this especially on the smaller projects, and we get to closing, oh yeah, my friend is staying in that apartment unit and he doesn't pay any rent. There's no lease, there's no rent, there's no nothing.
We have a lease, but I lost it.
Yeah. So,
I see our property manager, Lauren, over there shaking her head.
Yeah.
She's seen this about a dozen times.
Yeah, look at the rent roll, ask to see their bank statements that reconcile with the rent roll. If it says you got 8 tenants and they pay, $12,000 a month, then let me see the bank statements that show $12,000 a month going in your operating account. And oh, by the way, I want to go talk to 3 of the tenants, and I don't necessarily need a written estoppel certificate, but I want to talk to them and say, is this your lease? Do you have a security deposit? Just get a test sample of the tenants.
That's perfectly timed when you're doing the walkthrough on the property.
Yeah.
It's great if you go there and the tenants are home and you can have those conversations. Everybody learns a lot there just from your gut feeling on if it's the right deal for you or not.
Yeah.
So we got a couple of scenarios for you, right? So these have not been pre-briefed or anything here. So let's say that we're going in on an investment deal, okay? We sign the contract, we put down the earnest money deposit, funds are transferred and things like that, and then they get cold feet.
That comes up occasionally, not that often. Again, if you use the PAR agreement, you don't have, as a buyer, you don't have a huge amount of recourse. I mean, you can get your deposit back and you're out all your due diligence costs. The other alternative is sue the seller for specific performance, which is, 12 months and $25,000 later, maybe you get the property. I mean, that's really it. I mean, even the sophisticated commercial agreements, like if the seller just terminates without cause, I mean, they may terminate because, they got cancer, or maybe they terminate strategically because there's a different buyer. Even in most agreements don't provide that, like if the seller willfully and in bad faith terminates, that the buyer gets all their due diligence costs back. I mean, if you're smart, you can build that into the agreement, but that's not a common provision.
That's the first I've encountered that thought.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way of protecting yourself as a
Yeah.
buyer. How about if you're an investor and you're putting together, we'll call it Phil Capital 3, right? And so you're out there and you've done this a couple of times and you get 10 investors, they're all people you've worked with before, and then all of a sudden 2 of them get cold feet.
Yep.
They put the money into the account and you're about to close on the deal and all of a sudden they're like, I want out.
Yep.
Can you hold their feet to the fire for that contract, typically?
Yes, I mean, there are the syndication agreement usually specifically addresses that. Usually you get an initial capital contribution from your investors up front at the initial closing, which might be 50% of the whole deal, depends if there's heavy construction or not. And once they sign like that and you close, like that money is yours. What happens much more often is somebody just for financial reasons can't make a follow-up capital call. Again, like if, you say, yeah, I'll give you $100,000. I'm going to put up 50 initially. That's the initial closing, and I agree to put up an additional 50 if you call it during the, there's usually a capital call period, which is maybe a year or 2 after the initial closing. Depends on the project. And again, they just have some financial trouble, and they say, oh, I can't make it. And so there's a variety of remedies for you as the promoter. What do you do when one of your partners didn't make his mandatory contribution? And you basically just adjust them down.
So
adjust
you
their
got to have
ownership.
that in that operating agreement, so they know before they're signing up what they're getting into.
I mean, if they back out before, like if you're even closed, I'd probably just let them go. But like if you've already closed and you need it to actually acquire the property, maybe you negotiate something, but if you don't have alternative financing, you might be in default. So you might say, hey, like it's too late. Like if we have a deal, we have a $100,000 deposit. Like I need your money to close.
Yeah. What if you're in the same scenario, right? So you're in a full-blown Reg D, everything. You're a year in, and one of your investors goes bankrupt. Does that affect you at all as an operator, or is it just kind of?
The entity usually not. Okay. Bankruptcy of one partner would typically not be that relevant or impact the entity. Sometimes the loan documents will specify that if the general partner files bankruptcy or one of the principals files bankruptcy, that's a default. But usually not for the sort of the outside investors, limited partners, whatever you want to call them. You probably want to buy them out and just remove that person from the entity just to make it. You don't want the entity to get dragged into his bankruptcy proceeding, his or her bankruptcy proceeding, but it shouldn't affect the ongoing operations of the business nor compliance with the loan documents or financial covenants. But again, that's not going to be true if it's the main guy, the main person.
Right, gotcha.
So what we're going to do here is we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. I know you guys have probably seen a couple of things or have a couple of questions here. And then after that, we've got our lightning round at the end here. So who's got some questions they want to ask? Scenarios that maybe are playing out there? Anybody? Yeah. All right.
If you're syndicating and you say, your business plan is to you buy, hold, and sell 5 years, and you're looking for another deal. Can you take advantage of 1031? Is that all pass through, and all of your investors have to do their work to 1031 into your next deal? Is there any way to?
The entity itself would be the 1031 exchange party. So, and sometimes investors want to get out. They say, hey, like, great, I'm glad you did well. I'm glad, we're going to sell, and what you want to do is take your money and, roll it into a next 1031 replacement property. You would probably want to tell the investors up front that you may want to do that. I mean, most syndication deals, most projects like that, they have a finite term. So, again, if I'm giving you money, like I don't want it to be locked up for 15 years. Like I don't want it to keep rolling 1031 exchange after, one after another. Many may want to stay in because you're right, it would defer their capital gains, but some would want to get out. So you would probably just buy those individual investors out. I mean, if you and some of the other major partners have the money, you could say, fine, we're going to sell, we're going to do a 1031, we're going to stay in the entity, but we'll buy you out. We understand you don't want to. So you can buy out individual members, but the entity would stay intact and roll forward.
Is the opposite true? So let's say that I am a passive investor, Cole's putting together his next Volcan Capital deal, and then at that point, he's giving me my funds back. Can I 1031 that into another, whether it's Volcan Capital or something else?
It's the 1031 rules require the same, what's called taxpayer, which means if...
So the same EIN,
Yes.
same entity there?
Yes, the entity that owns the real estate, that sells the, what's called relinquished property, it's gotta be that same entity that buys the, so if you sell and just, distribute all the proceeds, like you can't take your money and roll it into a 1031 because you weren't the owner of the real estate.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Okay, so, you said, obviously, these people that are buying in, they're buying into the company, correct? Right, the LLC?
Yep.
So, and then the LLC holds the property, but if you were gonna sell and not do 1031, don't you have to pay off the investors anyway? So.
Typically, yes.
So even if you 1031, like, why does that have to be spoken up front? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Like, obviously you want to be forward with everyone, but maybe like that wasn't your plan at first, and 5 years from now, like that's
Right. If the plans change, again, like investors gave you money and they, with the expectation that, look, my investment has a finite term.
Okay.
So, and then sometimes it's
5 years, you're like 3
Right.
years in, I'm like, all right,
and sometimes it's mandatory that says, look, like, you're gonna this partnership, this entity, this LLC, it's gonna terminate after 7 years. Again, because if I'm investing with Ryan, like, he's not Citibank. Like, I want the thing to end after
Right.
7 years.
Right.
If he comes up with an idea and it just makes sense for a whole bunch of reasons to do a 1031 at that time, you would want to address and ask all the individual investors, because otherwise the normal structure is you sell and everybody expects, like, that's it. Like, yeah, I get my piece, I get my investment back, like that was my whole plan.
right, so when you 1031 then, isn't it essentially you're just buying out their part of the company when you pay them off?
The entity would keep most of the proceeds from the sale and
Right.
use those proceeds to buy the replacement property. But if one or two want to get out, you could,
Yeah.
what's called,
So technically they have to go with me unless I buy them out.
correct.
Thank you. Oh, I did, sorry. I did. So not real estate, it didn't happen for a real estate purpose, it happened for my parents selling their business, or part of, whatever. Anyways, a proof of sale, does that happen, like, between buyer and seller? Like, say like I'm a buyer, I'm like, I really want this proof of sale because, here's my money, and then doesn't that hold the seller, like, legally, they have to sell, they can't back out, and then I can be like, okay, well, you backed out, so now I can sue you.
What do you mean proof of sale? I'm not sure.
So
what you-
so my parents were trying to sell one of their businesses, and the buyer kept saying, I want a proof of sale, I want a proof of sale. Just like some little thing written up like, I intend on selling to you, I don't plan on backing out or selling to anyone else. We'll both sign here acknowledging that agreement. And so obviously my parents didn't sign that because they didn't have a contract written up yet about like what's going to be all like given to them, like what are they actually buying? Are they buying for customers and our all of our stuff? So my parents didn't sign a proof of sale, which ended up saving them because they couldn't come to a contract agreement of what was going to happen.
Okay.
So does that make sense? Like, so can you do
Yeah,
that?
I mean, it sounds
Does that-
like
does
sometimes
that help you?
sometimes it sounds like a term sheet or a letter of intent, just like a summary of the
Yeah,
deal.
yeah.
And usually if it's properly written, the letter of intent specifically says, look, this is not a binding agreement.
Oh, I was saying proof of sale, I'm sorry, it was a letter, it was the letter of intent.
Right.
Sorry.
And so again, like a properly worded one will say, look, these are the basic terms that we intend to do this deal, but this is not a definitive agreement, and if I decide to back out at any time, like, you can't sue me. So like, again, a carefully written
Right.
letter of intent, it has that provision in there, just because, you know, a million things can happen between, yeah, we met at a bar and we agreed on some terms, but then, you know, I went to see my lawyer and he said, you're crazy, and like 4 weeks later, like,
Yeah,
you don't have an agreement. So yeah,
Okay, so like, you would say like that would be a recommended like letter of intent?
a letter of intent, I think, especially for a bigger deal, it's
Right.
pretty common. It helps everybody
Yeah.
make sure you're on the same page. It helps the lawyers draft the agreement.
Okay.
Because if you don't have, like if you can't agree on, I mean, usually they're literally 1 or 2 pages. If you can't agree on those basic terms, like you're never going to get to the full-blown agreement.
Well, and the other thing is it's a real time saving. I could write out 10 letters of intent in the time it takes me to do one full-blown contract there.
Right.
So, you know, if you're sending out one of those shotgun blast methods of, hey, I know your property is listed for $650, I'm going to offer you $375, here's a letter of intent. You know, you send out 10 of them and everybody, you know, you'll send out 100 of them and then every now and then somebody bites, right? You know, that's one of the lead generation techniques you see taught in a lot of the real estate circles. So it's a way of doing that. Imagine if you had to do that with a full agreement of sale, like you'd never have enough time to do that.
Right.
So you're just quick little intent to purchase can really save your time.
And it's nice having that feedback too. Like I feel like the letter of intent's like a bridge between full-blown agreement and not interested. Where you're like, hey, I'm interested, I'm a serious party, I'm writing you this offer, but it's not binding. So I feel like it really gets the conversation going too.
Okay. It's just like the way they like explained to my parents, like the letter of intent, if they did sign it, like they were binded to them regardless of contract. So obviously like my parents' drip contract, they didn't like the terms. The terms they were giving us were absolutely insane. And then, you know, now they're like, oh, well, I went and bought this, and now I want to sue you for this, because now we don't have a contract. And the lawyer's like, well, you're lucky you don't have a letter of intent to sell them, because that could have hurt you. I don't know.
Yeah.
As buyer, I mean seller, sorry.
Do you have any thoughts on that? Further thoughts?
No, I mean, just they're really common, again, especially as deals get bigger, just because, you know, there's a whole bunch of people involved and everybody's going to spend a fair amount of money getting to the agreement stage, and usually even before the agreement, there's some due diligence that's done. So I think that's why they're really common, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, the real basic business terms, you know, price, due diligence period, date of closing.
Yeah.
But again, like, they're all the carefully worded ones specifically say, like, this is not binding.
Right. Yeah. We had 2 questions here.
You mentioned that in an agreement of sale, you'll build in the ability to recoup due diligence money. What are some other things that you build into your agreement of sale?
That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, I sort of have a general comment, which is, you know, I think the PAR realtor form is okay, again, for single-family homes, and it's okay for maybe like a 4-unit that's, I mean, you know, whatever, in the old days they were $500,000-$600,000, but like if it's a, you know, $2 million deal for like a 16-unit or whatever the math is, like, you know, don't use the PAR agreement. I mean, I don't think it's appropriate. I mean, there's things in there, I mean, I've literally spent like 15 years perfecting I have a buyer side agreement and a seller side agreement. Just because there's things, again, not that like, it's not like a horrible New York style, like I'm gonna kill you agreement, but it's got some things that you just want if you're the buyer or if you're the seller. And that, you know, that's one example. Like if you're the buyer and the seller terminates in bad faith, which is, you know, sort of an ambiguous term, like I want my out-of-pocket costs. It's totally unfair. You can't just strategically terminate because somebody gave you a better offer and I'm out, you know, on these bigger deals, you could have $40,000 of costs, and if you're getting like, you know, one of these big Fannie Mae agency loans, maybe you put up $40,000 of a non-refundable deposit. I mean, you could be out a huge amount of money. So, you know, that's one of the sneaky ones. You know, not sneaky, but just smart. Some of the other things that are, you know, not in the PAR agreement is this is sort of a sticky issue because a lot of sellers won't agree to this, but like, look, I'm buying a 20-unit apartment building. Right now, there's only one vacancy. So when I close, I want only one vacancy. Because like, what if we close and there's now 5 vacancies? Like, that's not the deal I signed up for. I know it's residential. Yeah, I can probably release it pretty quickly, but my lender's not gonna be happy. They might require me to escrow something at closing because I don't have the immediate cash flow to support the loan. Like, from day one, I'm in violation of the financial loan covenants. So, you know, there's kind of 2 sides to that. One is, again, you say, look, I want 90% occupancy. If not, you're in default. Or I want 90% occupancy, and for every unit less than 90%, you give me a, you know, like 2-month rent credit, because it's gonna take me 2 months to lease it up.
That's brilliant.
You know, that's kind of again, that's like a smart provision, and it's not like a technical, stupid lawyer provision that like nobody cares about, nobody understands, and is like never gonna be a real problem. It's like on day one, this is a real math lender problem. So.
So we've got a couple of questions here for you to finish things up this evening. Lightning round here. So in your opinion, what separates the truly top investors that you work with from the rest of the crowd that's just, you know, doing okay?
Yep. I think I said this before. It's just diligence.
Diligence.
Yeah. They're just, you know, I mean, my guy's my most successful client. He's a maniac. I mean, like I said, I review his snowplow agreements. I mean, yeah, he's smart, but just, you know, this is like a, you know, stupid generality, but he just works hard. I mean, the successful guys work hard, and they're really diligent.
I like that. What is a daily habit that contributes to your success?
I don't know, I try to call people back on the same day.
I love it.
Follow-ups, everything.
I
love it.
You know, a lot of
range every day.
yeah, I golf a lot.
Where do you golf?
Northampton. Yeah. I mean, a lot of lawyers. I don't know. I mean, I go to work. I'm there in the office from 9 to 5 every day, and I call people back. And you know, I don't think I'm like, you know, some of the older lawyers. You know, they're a little bit old-fashioned. You know, like they send emails through their secretary. I mean, I don't know how they survive doing that. Honestly, I mean, I send 100 emails a day. Like, if you're one of those old timers that only emails through your secretary, I don't know how you stay in business.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's a piece of advice you'd give to yourself if you were starting this whole journey all over again?
That's a good question. I'm going to modify the question slightly,
Yeah.
which is, when I finally moved back here when I was 30 and like started up like my current life, like I think I was pretty linear and focused and did everything properly, but immediately before that I was living in California and kind of floundering around. This is after law school also, and I think I felt entitled because, you know, I had gone to law school and I thought, you know, I was smart and could do a good job at things, and I think I didn't like accept that I had to go through, you know, like a garbage period, you know, where I get all the garbage work, you know, people treat me badly, you know, I need to service, you know, more senior, you know, staff people. I didn't see the big picture at that point. And I think, you know, I see that in my kids now, like, you know, you just have to suffer, you know.
Yeah. Yep.
So-
Yep.
Sure.
All right, last one for you. What is the biggest non-monetary benefit that you've gotten from either just servicing real estate or just however you want to change that up for you?
I think I don't know, I mean, I think not so much real estate, but just because of the nature of what I do, which is just transactional practice. I mean, you know, my clients, you know, they stay with me for years. I mean, for 10 or 15 years, and they call me literally every day. So, I mean, I view most of them as my friends. So it's not like I have I don't do divorces, but it's not like I have a divorce case where the husband is unhappy and he's fighting and it's a horrible situation for everybody. And then after the divorce is finally settled a year later, like I never see or hear from him again. I mean, most of my clients I talk to and see and hear from regularly. And again, I like most of them.
Yeah.
So.
That's awesome. Most of them.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here and spending time with us. So I want to give Rob a round of applause. So,
All right. And so what we're going to do here is a little different. Okay, so if you've been to some of the other events, everybody comes here looking for something. Everybody comes here with something of value to give to the group. So what we're going to do here, all right, so who is looking to buy a property? Raise your hand. All right, who's got a property to sell? Raise your hand. All right, so buyers, go talk to those three right there. Okay, who here is a real estate agent? Okay, who's a property manager? Okay, who's a lender or has capital? All right, any private lenders here? Or mortgage brokers? Anyone else along that? Who's a contractor? Who's looking for a contractor? Everyone raise your hand. These people are worth their weight in gold here. Okay, awesome. So now you guys know who to talk to. All right, and overall.
and just tie it up. Thanks again to Aday, guys. If anybody wants to talk about that or dive into what he's doing or how we can get a piece of that, please let me know and I'll share some info. And last but not least, like I said, we're looking for a building. And so if anybody here has a 20 to 50 unit, please come talk to me. We're ready to go. And if somebody wants to invest in that building that we eventually find, also please come talk to me. But anyways, guys, thank you all for coming and just hang out, please. Food, drink, everything, and we'll talk. So that's it.
Thank you.